Okay, guys, I wanted to make a quick video in regard to laptop lithium cells. There seems to be quite a bit of misleading information on the internet regarding this stuff. It seems that everybody's an expert and everybody's not. Now, these are quite dangerous cells if you don't know what you're doing with them. And a lot of people, for instance, one of these cells, let's say, packs up in a pack, they'll change it with a random other cell from another laptop battery pack, and it works. But there's a massive danger to it. I don't think people understood, and this has not been covered in any information that I can find on the internet in any YouTube videos or information as such. There's different technologies in these battery packs, or otherwise known as smart batteries, because you have this little tiny PCB board here, and this PCB board has a little tiny microcontroller on it with firmware, and obviously this has a voltage rating of the firmware. It has the version of the firmware which controls and runs these batteries and these cells safely. But this one here with the orange cells is actually a genuine Hewlett-Packard battery. And it's using LG cells. Now, this is what's very important and was something that you really have to pay close attention to. This pack has more of a protection circuit because not only does it have the overvoltage and undervoltage cutoff curves and charge circuit, but it also has a thermal protection monitoring circuit. And this pack's quite advanced in that sense, because if the cells do get too hot and there's an increase in temperature, then this pack will cut off the energy or throttle itself down in regards to the temperature of the actual cells themselves. This here is one of the cheapos from eBay and uses the SZNS, which are Chinese cells. This was rated on its pack as a 5200 milliamp hour battery. These actual cells individually are, if you are lucky, you are going to get 2200 milliamp hours out of them. They're more closer to 2000 milliamp hour, which effectively gives you either 4000 milliamp hour, because these are that each two cells are in paired parallels, and then each pair is then in series. So you're going to get either 4000 milliamp hour or 42,000 milliamp hour, 44,000 milliamp hour. Again, these are not the greatest of, rated cells. Again, you can see they're 3.7 volt by 7.4 watt hours. There is the formula, you can calculate that out and divide the voltage and so on and so forth to give you the milliamp hours or the current that these batteries can deliver, which is not actually that much. On the other hand, these ones from HP are considerably higher energy cells. And what is massively different about these, and this is a point that people have to pay attention to, is that these don't charge at the common 4.2 volts, and it's largely assumed across the internet at the moment that these lithium 1865 model cells, which, as you can see here, this model number is LGBAC 21865. So it's an 1865 cell. Sometimes they have a zero at the end, but effectively they all charge at 4.2 volts. That's not true. The way these work is, in their first stages of charging, they work on a constant current, or what's known as a CC. So the voltage is not fixed. So it's not charged at a fixed 4.2 volts, it's charged at a fixed current. So the current is effectively regulated for the first portion of the charge over a set period of time, depending on the cell. Then after, on a constant current, once the voltage reaches 3.7 volts, which is like what the batteries are particularly rated for, or reaches up to either 4.2 or 4.3 volts, depending. At that point, it moves from a constant current charge to a constant voltage charge. So then the voltage is regulated for the rest of the period of the charge, for the set period of time, not at a current constant, but at a voltage constant, so that the voltage remains constant. Now, for the standard cells, that's 4.2 volts. For what most commonly, and this is the thing, but for particular cells, particularly these LG ones, it's actually 4.3 volts. So charging these at 4.2 are not good. Now, here's where the problem exists. If one was to take these batteries, let's say you buy brand spanking new Samsung cells or Panasonics, and then you replace these yellow ones with those, they're rated on 4.2 volt constant voltage. So effectively, the constant current will bring the power of the cell up to 4.2 volts. And then it will require a constant voltage charge of 4.2. The problem is that these cells charge at 4.3, and you think, well, that's not a problem, it's less. Unfortunately not, because this charging circuit that HP has included in its pack wants to charge these cells at 4.3. So what it's going to do is it's going to constant current the cells up to 4.3 volts, then flick to constant voltage and charge these cells at 4.3. Now, if you put 4.2 volt cells in these, or replace one of these cells, which you find that's bad, whichever one it is, and then replace that with a 4.2 constant voltage charge cell, you are risking the battery pack possibly catching fire, exploding, venting, all sorts of different, faults that can occur from that. So it's very important that you understand the constant current and the constant voltage rate for each battery that's manufactured and how each one is designed to be charged. So this is the thing. There's a lot of people that have not mentioned that anywhere on any of the YouTube videos or across any of the videos on the internet, which I find is quite dangerous, because mixing cells is not a good idea. And obviously you think, well, I'll take all the cells out and then I'll put all of these into that one. Well, no, because as we've just mentioned, that charging circuit that is programmed by HP is for 4.3 volt cells, which are like a high energy cell, very different to the standard 4.2 volt charge constant voltage cells. This is a constant voltage of 4.3. So this circuit here is going to over voltage a 4.2 volt charge cell, which is going to cause, or could, not going to, it doesn't mean it's going to do it every time, but it could result in these cells leaking, as in venting, catching fire, exploding, all sorts of dangerous effects. And this is why these are called smart batteries and require this special circuits to manage what's going on with the cells. It's not like nickel metal hydroxides or nickel cadmiums, where they don't, they just require a constant voltage to charge them to replenish their energy. With lithiums, they require a specific method of charging with a specific current and a specific voltage. And they're in the two stages where they first start off in constant current, which is where the current is regulated and the voltage slowly rises. And as soon as the circuit detects it hits the voltage that it wants to transfer into constant voltage charging, for instance, these cells are 4.3. So once this hits 4.3, this circuit turns from constant current into constant voltage charging. And then it constantly, on the curve, it constantly charges these at 4.3 volts. For the remainder of the charge, which is effectively, that end piece is referred to as the float charge, which finally replenishes the complete energy inside these cells. If you did 4.3 with these 4.2s, you run the risk of these exploding. So, and I see a lot of people, particularly on YouTube videos, swapping and interchanging cells from one to the other, not paying any attention to what the constant voltage charge is. And everybody thinks, well, yes, you can actually increase your milliamp hours. So, for instance, these being 2200s, supposedly, hypothetically speaking, you could then put something like a 28 or a 30, even a 3500, like one of the big Samsung high energy cells in there, 3500s. I think Panasonic do some, which are 3.5 amp hour cells, and you could put those in there. Now that would be fine, provided the constant current and the constant voltage charge to these cells coming from the PCB's regulation circuit and control chip is correct and correctly maintains the charge in those cells. So you can up the size of the milliamp hours of these cells, but you must pay very close attention to the constant voltage and constant current charge characteristics of each lithium cell. And that's why you have to pay very close attention, because if these cells, like these cells here, 2200s, matched in parallel to give you effectively 4400 milliamp hour, or 4.4 amp hour, at a constant charge voltage, when I looked at the data sheet on the internet, of 4.2 volts. So this charge circuit wants a constant voltage charge of 4.2 volts. You could not use these cells in this, and you shouldn't use these cells in that, because that charge circuit will overcharge with an overvoltage on these cells and cause considerable problems. So, excuse me a moment, I've got a phone call. Let me cancel that. So this is the discrepancy between the two and the misleading information that's out there. Now, on top of all of that, the protection circuits in some of these cheap Chinese ones, again, don't have the thermal protection. Excuse me a moment. Sorry about that. That's spam. It's a spam phone call come through. I recognise the number trying to sell me stuff again. They never leave you in peace nowadays. But as you can see, this has a thermal protection circuit, like we mentioned earlier, which protects the temperature of the cells. These cheap Chinese ones don't, and they don't have the thermal protection circuit. Also, if you look, the HP ones are slightly well built, because they have a much wider strip on, rather than the inside. These ones here, they have like a temperature resistant thermal silicon wires. Now, it's been known before that there's very few strands of copper inside these wires, so there's no way that this cell would handle, any considerable current. So if you updated the cheap Chinese pack to a higher current cells, you may, if you require, or if the device you're using it in will pull more current, it may cause issues with these lower current rating wires in here. So quite a considerable thing to start modifying these packs. Not advisable for anybody really to do it unless you actually do know what you're talking about, and do know what you're doing with them. Unfortunately, though, with this HP pack, these LG cells with the constant voltage charge of 4.3 volts are discontinued, and you're unable to get these anymore. Trying to find the higher charge cells in a Samsung, which Samsung do one. I think it's about 4.32 or 4.35 maximum charge, constant voltage charge. Very difficult to get hold of again, but they would be adequate to replace in here, because this charge circuit would be charging it at 4.3 volts constant charge, and it would be less than the 4.32 or 4.35 constant voltage charge that the Samsung cells are rated at. So Samsung cells could replace these quite simply, with them, if you could find them and if you could buy them. Very difficult to get hold of, I've tended to find, because the most common ones are all basically lithium cells on 4.2 volt constant voltage charge. So one has to pay very close attention to exactly what are the cells in your pack, which therefore allows you to figure out what type of charging curve the smart batteries PCB board circuit is going to be charging these at, because you certainly do not want to be using a circuit like this that's on the HP battery to charge 4.2 volt constant voltage charge cells, which of course would cause considerable issues. Now, if you were to take a 4.3 volt cells and use the charge circuit in the cheap Chinese made £10 battery pack to charge a 4.3 volt cell with 4.2 volt constant voltage, it wouldn't necessarily create a large problem. But what would happen is the amount of charge that would be contained in these cells from this charger would not utilize the full capacity of the full amount of potential that these cells could store from their charge. So the battery pack would last longer. It would behave like a lower milliamp or lower energy battery pack being charged by this curve. So this charge circuit here fits these cells, and that's the thing. That's why in some cases, when you look on whether it's eBay or across different sellers, they tell you make sure the cells that you replace are identical model number and type to the ones that you are taking out. So you replace them with the exact identical type, because that way it matches the charging circuit. So I just wanted to make a quick video just so that's explained out there, because that information doesn't seem to be mentioned too much in across the internet, and that's quite a critical thing, because it can cause serious bodily harm. These things, when they go off, they burn very, very hot. Not to say that they particularly explode, but they certainly do go off very violently, in a very violent reaction. And you certainly don't want that. You don't want to be anywhere near it when it does that. And you certainly don't want that when you've left it on charge unattended and you've gone to the shop to do yourself some shopping and then come back to find, you've got your property, engulfed in fire. So these are, definitely pay attention to what you're doing with these things. So just a bit of a heads up, really. A bit of a warning to everybody out there, really, as I say, when you're doing this. Pay attention to the fact that if you're going to replace these things, make sure you replace them like for like, or find the exact equivalents that are going to work with the constant current, the constant voltage charge for your circuit, and pay attention to the actual wiring and the type of wires that are capable, because some of these wires that they use, particularly in this cheap Chinese one, may not be adequate enough to carry the current. So if you do put a higher energy cell in, these cables won't handle it, if the current's required. Not to mention that maybe even the tracking on the PCB board might not handle it. Although there is protection on these PCB boards. You've got fuse, you've got literally the firmware protection, you've got cut-off, anti-tamper. There's quite a bit on here. Obviously there's a selection where it's wired up here to give you the different voltages, where you've got 4 volts, then you've got 8 volts there, you've got 12 volts and 16 volts to its maximum. So that's its maximum circuit charge, obviously with these cells full, because 3.7 volts is the nominal voltage. When these cells get fully charged, they could, they could be up to the actual charged current, which is 4.7 volts. The 3.7 is the nominal. That's the sort of average of the lowest and the highest. So, and with these being a 4.2 constant voltage, that's where you're going to be. So you're going to be up there at the 4.7. So, and each section, when it's in series, like that'll be a 4.7 volt cell across these two. Then this one here would be 4.7 times 2, obviously, against from here to here, because you're in series with that one. Then you're in series again with the third one. Then you're in series again with the fourth one. So then effectively that's 4.2 plus 4.2 plus 4.2 plus 4.2. That's your highest value there, you know. So you have, that's why they do. And then lithiums are not very good at voltage regulation. They have a high voltage state and a low voltage state as the discharge. So there has to be a voltage regulation unit on these PCB boards, which is exactly what the chip, which is not on the front here. I can't show you on the front. It's on the back, behind this piece of insulated white tape, effectively. But yes, there's a set of chips on the back here, which are your voltage regulators and charge regulators, and then the firmware, which obviously communicates. I believe it's an SM bus, simple management bus over 3 pins. I believe the outside ones are the two far right ones, I believe, are the ground. The very far right one is your positive, and there's 3 pins in the middle area, which are the SMB bus. But you can look that up on the internet to find out which ones are which. But that's not the scope of this video. The scope of this video is to understand, do not mix these cells, and pay very close attention to the way that the charging circuits are made up for those cells, because there are different cells, there are different constant current and constant voltage charge curves, and by intermixing cells without paying attention to the constant current and constant voltage charging, you can actually end up causing a considerable problem. So just a bit of a heads up to anybody that's messing around with these cells, to pay very close attention to that. And obviously try and pay attention to obviously thermal protections. It's a good feature to have. I believe, I'm not saying that HP patented it. I think they probably did, or they didn't. I don't know. They'll talk about it as their advertisement for their cells as being, you know, some kind of patented, you know, super technology or whatever that they've put in there. But I mean, it's seriously, all it is thermal protection. And they have got 2 PCB boards in here. One which is your board, which most likely contains the firmware and the voltage regulator, and the second board, which I believe would probably be dedicated to, you know, the cell protection, cell management, thermal protection, so on and so forth. The reason I say that is because that is the board that the thermistor is connected to, as well as all the cells go directly into, which then comes off and goes into the smart battery PCB board at the front there. I believe this one here would have all your fuses and fuse links and this, that and the rest of it, which would cause disconnection in the event of any kind of problem. So anyway, that's all I've got to say for the subject for today. Haven't made a video in a while, so yeah, need to get back into that. As I say, get a bit what do they call it? Camera stutter with ums and ahs. But yeah, so anyway, hope that helps people out in remaining safe with these battery packs. And as I said, all you got to do is just pay a little bit more attention to what you're doing and take the model numbers of the batteries that you're using, or the cells, check them up, compare your data before you start mixing. And I wouldn't advise mixing, but if you start interchanging packs, you know, pay close attention to that. You have to buy one of these cheap £10 eBay packs, because opening a HP pack causes you to damage the plastic. There's very little way that you're going to be able to get it back together properly. But these cheap £10 packs from eBay or whatever, they're a lot easier to open the plastic housing, because they're not stuck down as well as the HP models, and effectively you can take the guts and internals out of a HP model and put it into the housing of a £10 model, and yes, you've got like a new set of housing. As you can see, this one's in quite good condition as it comes apart. Yet unfortunately, when you look, you can't say the same for a HP pack, as it tends to destroy, or you have to sort of destroy it to be able to gain access to the packs. As you can see, it's very considerably damaged. Although I've tried my best to take it apart without damaging it, it does become a little beaten and battered. So for the sake of the case, that's the way you could do it, and then transfer those. But fortunately, I'm not going to be able to find any more of these cells, and it's becoming very difficult to get hold of the Samsung 4.3s. I believe LG do an alternative 4.32 or 4.35 volt. Again, constant voltage charge cell, but again, incredibly difficult to find and get a hold of. Yeah, and this battery pack is starting to die and deplete on its way out. So, but yeah. Anyway, stay safe, my good YouTubers and listeners, and speak again another time. Bye for now.